Accident poisoning, i.e. drug deaths, accounts for a significant shift in accidental deaths. However, again, we see numbers growing in one category and reducing in another. Why should accidental deaths increase as suicide is reduced? The concern is that this movement to accidental death by poisoning from suicide in turn may reduce the focus and acknowledgement in the scale of mental health deaths we have in Scotland. Also, by having a swamping of accidental death by poisoning, approximately from 17% to 50%, we can mask any underlying increase in other categories within accidental deaths that might not be getting the attention required. Underlying accidents grew from approximately 1,200 to 1,400 in this same time frame. When we look further into accidental deaths, we see that the deaths from falling has grown rapidly over the last decade or so. If we look at this in some detail, there appears to be a shift up in 2008 to 2012, then steady growth thereafter to a new level from about 2017. It is interesting that this is in fact a reversal of the homicide profile. It appears we are seeing significant shifts in allocation of cause of death in the very same time profiles across a broad front. The most important aspect of this is that we have another cause of death that they should be getting serious focus and an issue should be getting addressed. We have already seen that suicide for self-poisoning has been reducing, and this undoubtedly has played a significant role in their overall suicide numbers stabilising, and in fact showing a slight decrease overall. You should bear in mind that, like homicide, this was another area that had incredible media focus around 2010. What we're seeing is the reduction in suicide by poison reflected in the overall numbers dropping, but masking another area of consistent growth. That is underlying suicide for other causes. With drug deaths removed, it is growing, but being hidden by the apparent movement of death from one category to another. We can see that the numbers appear to be shifting from one category to another, and yet have the same underlying cause of death. This is disconcerting as we can miss the significant changes that are taking place, and the scale of a problem may be much bigger than we first thought. It is also concerning that we can shift cause of death from groups that have greater emotional support from society into other groups that definitely do not have that same public angst. And for that, I would say that's drug deaths. I want to take this analysis a step further and look at the changing face of drug deaths and examine the changes in the numbers as they are recorded year on year. This allows us to question why so little has been done when it is clear there have been more than one significant kick-up in fatalities. Therefore, this is another look at the impact of drugs, but this time we are again looking at drug deaths. The important part here is that we are now applying statistical control lines and are considering the data in both a dynamic and simultaneously statistical meaningful form. Using these control lines based upon relatively stable period prior to 2006, it should have forced us to ask questions in 2006 about the increase we see in deaths. And we know for definite there's a problem in 2007. This would appear an earlier warning signal of change than any analysis we have seen from this period. For us to be effective, however, we need to have an understanding of statistical meaning, but more importantly, possess the leadership with accountability that actually makes a difference. It all starts with the questions raised, but we need to have the anxiety to be worried about this development and have someone tasked with fixing it. And if we look when the narrative develops to raise questions on sudden death issues in Scotland, it is inevitably years after the problem begins to escalate. Not only does this lead to thousands of deaths, but we need to consider that many are probably preventable. We need to understand that our behaviour also grows to accept the status quo. It's sad that when we get to around 1,200 deaths a year, we end up just seeing this as a norm, and we lose sight of the individuals and the families who are being impacted by this. This needs to change. I think it's worth noting, at the same time as data showing a statistical change in 2006, a member of public raised concern via petition to Scottish Parliament. Again, they seem to be presumptive that they already knew what they were doing. And I wonder if someone had actually taken care to actually push for this review, could we have actually been in a position we could have made changes way back then? It seems typical of the petitions. They're just a sounding board and allowing people to vent. and they take no action. There's so little care in the government for death in general in Scotland. And I think this one epitomises that. I just wanted to use this chart to show once again that we have a move from suicide to accident. I have to stress again that it's hard to find any outrage or concern for accident in comparison to our feelings for suicide. In this chart, we see that again, as one category of sudden death goes up, the other goes down. Very little change in the overall numbers taking place, but a change in emphasis, the reviewing the numbers. The numbers are genuine. We should be asking what happened around 2008 to reduce one and increase the other. We're now looking at how suicide is recorded within a single region over the window that the SFIU is set up. We're moving from having uncertainties about cause of death to being very certain. Again, our families know from personal experience that it is incredibly easy to have a death signed off as suicide. And this says that it has been done with greater certainty. Has there been a genuine change in investigation capability? Is this simply just a decision to record in a specific way? In this final slide of this section, I want to focus on the first three causes of sudden death: drug deaths, falling, and self-infliction, and really use these to emphasise the crisis we have for sudden deaths in Scotland. In 2010, we had 1,525 deaths for these three categories. By 2020, we're up to 2,955. That's an increase of 1,430 deaths per year. If we could only cut the growth in these deaths in total by about 50%, we could save over 700 lives a year. Up to now, we have looked at our escalating sudden deaths across a number of different categories. The cause of our failure to act obviously lies in the realm of government. But I believe that we have been historically and systematically set up to fail. Here we will look at how our organisational setup is an obstacle for learning. In this slide, we're looking at the interrelationship between structure, culture, and capability. This entire presentation was really started after Police Scotland stated that they had 100% closure on homicide. This is a performance issue born from a culture allowed to develop in an inadequate structure. This is misplaced accountability. Leadership is obviously the key driver for success, but what happens when the structure gives the wrong leader in the wrong position the responsibility? I do believe that ownership for sudden death resides in the wrong location today, and with the best will in the world, it will not deliver the results required. We know that the Crown Office, Procurator Fiscal Services, and the Scottish Fatalities Investigation Unit are responsible for investigating sudden deaths. In our case, when focusing on suicide, accident and homicide, when you look at the core focus of their organisation, it is about serving their core function of prosecution and very little else. In doing this role, they evaluate and investigate in excess of 10,000 deaths per year. Even though there is a clear understanding that public's attitude is changing to how we review sudden deaths, we see that fatal acts inquiries are at 0.7% of the total of the sudden deaths. This is the lowest level of public testing in our history. FAIs are our nation's only attempt, save a few public inquiries, at pretending to understand and learn from any of the sudden deaths. We can see by the number of FAIs we have, it is such a trivial treatment of such a serious issue. We only have FAIs where it is deemed we have something to learn. We have some of the poorest death statistics and have the lowest public inquiry levels in the English-speaking world. We will have to ask, why do we learn nothing? As stated, in Scotland, we have only one rarely used vehicle for actually publicly testing the findings of cause of death. This is the fatal acts inquiry. Most FAIs are mandatory cases and others at the discretion of the Lord Advocate. Mandatory cases are things like death in custody. Later we will briefly look at how good we are doing with this. Even in the mandatory cases, the Lord Advocate has a right to prohibit them. So in effect, every FAI is at the Lord Advocate's discretion, not the need for society to learn or for the families to have answers. How many times do we see families asking for FAIs or public inquiries as they want questions addressed? In the very current analysis of death in custody that was developed out of Glasgow University, a detailed look at the effectiveness of FAIs was examined. We can see here, like broadly we're seeing across society at large, there is significant increases in death across a broad spectrum of areas of detention. Surely with this underlying backdrop and the fact that FAIs are supposedly mandatory, we would hope that critical lessons could emerge and learnings implemented. This report is very important as it's dealing with a large number of the FAIs that have actually taken place. Bearing in mind that FAIs look at around 0.7% of fatalities, so this gives us the best insight into how we look at sudden death in general. We can see by this analysis from Glasgow University that even today we see virtually no learning to be had from the death of individuals, and still families are not part of this system. We can see that the FAI was held and all government institutions were legally represented. In the case of Colin Marr, we had an FAI where we had a lawyer allocated for a week before the FAI and to represent his family through the inquiry. At the FAI, the institutions that let him down, cops, police and pathology, all had QC representation. The person who had previously been detained as a suspect had a junior QC and a team of lawyers funded by Crown. There was an argument that the Crown wanted to win and they weighted it accordingly. In this case, luckily, we had a good lawyer and he managed to get a result that kept us a platform for moving forward. This report from Glasgow University took an even longer view of FAIs from 2005 to 2020. And I think the most dramatic aspect is that only 15% of FAIs made a finding of precaution. If we simply extrapolate to the fact that FAIs only occur for 0.7% of sudden deaths, and we only have 15% with some sort of learning, without looking at the value of the learning, this shows that we're only learning from about 1.1% of sudden deaths. That is 1 in 1,000. I'm sure there will be arguments that we learn elsewhere, but if this is not open to public testing and scrutiny, anything can be said with little value. Our increasing sudden deaths should be the only barometer to how effective we review cause of death. So how does our appalling inability to learn come about? Well, this is a very simplified version of how our system looks. I believe that police report suspected homicides and criminality directly to cops. If we consider investigation and findings of sudden death from 2012 onwards, we see the introduction of the Scottish Fatalities Investigation Unit. This unit also reports into cops. The problem here is that what they are ultimately testing for are cases that could be open to prosecution or some form of judicial hearing. The total view will also include deaths in hospitals, etc. Out of approximately 10,000 deaths, cops are really only interested in about 135 cases, i.e. 1.35% of the total. They have to take these 135 cases and merge them into their dealing with an excess of 170,000 crimes a year. Thus, cops have no vested interest in the other cases. However, the other excess of 9,800 deaths are where our crisis resides. Here we're looking at the comments from 2019 from the then head of SFIU, David Green. If, as he's stating, we're actually processing too many deaths, it is very likely that the organisation is going to be overworked or under-resourced. It is a simple fact of life. Corners must be cut to stay on top of investigations, or forever growing backlog of cases will result. Thus, quicker and simpler assessments of cause of death must be the outcome. This also has to be taken with the level of stress policing appears to be under today. So what would that do to the quality of an investigation? If we now look at some of the categories that I've been focused on as part of this analysis, we can see that where cops and police have responsibility, there has been a reduction in the number of deaths recorded in 2020 in comparison to 2010. This was primarily in transport fatalities and homicide. If you look at the other categories, everything increased. The areas they weren't focused on have increased, while the areas they have responsibility have improved. I think a good example of the difference in attitude can be seen through a fatal car accident. We see teams of experts arrive on the road getting completely closed until a full analysis has taken place. And this could be an accident or anything, but the attention to detail is impressive. By contrast, just last year in Fife, two young people were found dead in their home. One was in bed with some bruising to the face, the other was in the living room, and the house had been ransacked. This was immediately seen as a drug death scene, and it took 7 months later before toxicology results were given to the family. And this was done over the phone, not an official letter. If we go back to one of the Fiscal Service's key priorities, it was to allay public anxieties about particular deaths. Does this chart exemplify that very narrow focus? Although sudden deaths are increasing dramatically, we need to ask our question, is the quality of investigation improving? So another simple check on our ability to determine effectiveness in our investigation capability is to look at our understanding of the findings of a homicide investigation. As part of the investigation findings, the reason for the homicide is attempted to be given, i.e. jealousy, gang fight, etc. With the ever lower numbers of homicides and the ability to be sure we have the right person, surely our understanding of the drivers for homicide would have went up. In fact, the opposite has occurred. We seem to understand less than we did when we had almost double the quantity of homicides. Is this consistent with having experts, or is it consistent with just wrapping things up? Also, in conjunction with a lack of understanding for the drivers of homicide, we're seeing that the number of accidents where the cause of death is unascertained is on the increase. Again, the question has to be, does this seem consistent with greater understanding? Just as we draw to a close on the need for change and the organizational limitations we face, this chart actually shows some grim reading. It will stay like this unless we accept we have to change at the most fundamental level and join the 21st century. This chart clearly has a focus on drug and alcohol deaths, but hopefully you have seen that our problems go way beyond that. Throughout this presentation, it's really been focused on the negative, but I do believe there is a way through this. But it will take strong leadership to make it happen. And what I'd like to do in the following slides is show some of the ways that maybe we could move forward. The primary focus of cops and police on criminality must really be at the exclusion of other causes of death. This in itself is not the fault of the organizations, but a fault of the structure. It is right that organizations focus on their primary objectives, but we have a problem when that objective is such a small part of the overall profile of sudden deaths. Who does have responsibility for the other deaths? How else could we do this? From my understanding, the rest of the English-speaking nations have coroner's inquests. Look at the focus for England and Wales. It is on preventing future deaths and for the benefit of the family. We do not necessarily need a coroner, but we do need some kind of public vehicle to have the same purpose. We keep hearing about progressive politics in our country, and yet so little care is actually given to those lost, other than political blame. These people and their families deserve more. This is a brief consideration of what actually takes place down south, and must be some sort of reference to the disparity in our approach. As stated, we clearly do not need to copy the coroner system, but the scale of investigation and family participation from outside the prosecution system is significant in England and Wales. The importance of understanding the circumstances of death and the possible elimination of the cause must be broader than that which is considered today in Scotland. And a very recent example was a coroner's inquest in December 19th, 2023. It was the suicide of head teacher Ruth Perry. And the conclusion was that it was contributed by Ofsted inspection. And they actually put corrective action on Ofsted to look at how they dealt with teachers. I mean, this is a step beyond our everyday review of deaths. We should also consider another inquest which was held in England. The coroner criticised the probation services and the actions of the police. This has to be contrasted with the situation with Barry Dixon's family, who, even after a successful prosecution in his homicide case, they have to personally chase for answers on why someone was allowed to run amok when they were on bail and curfew, and no action taken until Barry was killed. We seem to have a system that knows how to punish, but not how to learn. I know at times we have an aversion in Scotland from learning for anything from England. So I thought it'd be worthwhile to include these comments from the Irish Council of Civil Liberties from 2020. They actually like the English system. An old adage from my working days was that we needed to learn to steal good ideas shamelessly. We do have an opportunity here to create something that can make us all feel part of society, connected to our policing, and to be proud of this. We see here that even Ireland, which is a population size similar to Scotland, has 2,225 inquests a year compared to our 34 to 50 FAIs. Again, it's an example of showing that we don't care about sudden death, but we have the opportunity to change. In a recent publication from the European Court of Human Rights from August 2022, they underlined that Article 2, which is really the driver for needing FAIs, also comes into play in situations where the person concerned was a victim of an activity or conduct, whether public or private, which by its nature put his or her life at real and imminent risk. We must see that it's not only principle but morally required that we need to change, but it's essential if we want to save lives. There is a huge opportunity out there to affect change, but we need to remove the blinkers to the historic institutional behaviours we have. A byproduct of our thorough investigation system is that crimes are likely to increase and failings are likely to be found. In the short term, that gives the impression things are getting worse, but in reality, we're gaining greater insight. It takes strength and preparedness to take this step. The real reading of success or failure must come from a reduction in the total number of sudden deaths, not allowing the self-satisfying of police and cops' responsibilities. If this change is grasped, the shift in expected numbers must be communicated to prepare public. If this is not done in a timely manner, the next government or police chief will be trapped into hiding true numbers in fear of political exploitation. So after much analysis and extensive dialogue with other families and professionals, these are some of the key findings. I mean, the fundamental is Scotland does not care about sudden death. We talk about it, but caring is about action. No one is accountable for improving sudden death. The crisis extends beyond drugs. FAIs are a blind spot, a misunderstood and misleading artifact. And changing FAIs will change little. There's no substantive learning or opportunities to learn in place. And what we do see, where there is accountability, there is improvement, no matter how small. The upside is there is opportunity to change at relatively low cost. And part of that is the recognition of family needs and being involved, a need to think differently, and an increase in responsiveness to change is a simple step. In this final slide, I just really want to put it simply of what our requirements are. We really need a system that facilitates the potential to publicly review all sudden deaths, with the aim to prevent future cases with the families at the heart of those investigations and findings. With a system such as this, one that is independent from cops, we should see far fewer cases than those like our families have faced. It is morally wrong that families have to fight tooth and nail to get near the truth, while organisations that should be founded upon integrity can protect themselves through lies and deception, while being beyond any reasonable accountability. Thank you. Right. Yeah. Sleep.
Thank you so much, Stuart. There's certainly a lot to get our heads round there, and sincere apologies. We are live now on Facebook, but
Right.
not on our Faces and Voices a recovery page, unfortunately, on Cycle for Recovery. So we will try and upload the rest of this presentation, or we might even just try and do it again another day. But
Yeah.
yes, gosh, where do you even start? There's so much there. I don't know if Davy and Alan have got any questions. Alan, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I was interested to learn that obviously the system's a bit different in Scotland to it is in England in terms of how like coroners' inquests work, and they're ran sort of locally by local authorities. You had touched on, Stuart, the fact that although I don't suppose you're advocating for that to be put in place, and is the same model, but something along the lines. Do you think that that would still that would make things better? Obviously, I ask that because obviously, um, if you were implementing that, there'd need to be a change in some aspects of how death is recorded and reported in Scotland.
Yeah.
To sort of make that work. I'm wondering maybe what your thoughts are on that.
My thoughts are, I think there's an easy move. The SFIU should still exist. It just shouldn't report into the Crown Office, the prosecuting service. It should be social justice, because 98% of the deaths are on the social side of our lives. But we need leadership, because you do nothing without leadership. It can't be a passive, just sitting there, groups of 20, 30 teens talking about it for 3 years or something. We really need to care. And I think I said at the beginning, action is where care comes in. Does that make sense? So,
Yes, thank you.
yeah. The other thing is, I think every other English-speaking nation, I believe, has coroners. The numbers of inquests do vary, but they all have coroners. So it is interesting because you catch up in our independence debates up here, and countries that become independent never want to be go back to be part of UK. Ironically, everyone that became independent kept the coroner's inquest. So there must be, I'm hopeful there's some merit in it, The principle of it, I think, is a better way of putting it.
Yeah, David, was there anything you wanted to ask? Or?
No, really. I don't think I've got much of value to contribute here, but thanks very much for the slideshow and all that information, Stuart. It's a lot to get my head around. Maybe a question, if it makes sense. The way it was presented and looking at the dates sort of interests me. Where I've got a struggle to trust, like how data is collated and presented, and in this country at the moment. And we keep looking at a particular time frame. It's really the last 20 years. Like you were presenting a lot of data between 2006 onwards, and how things are being presented differently, or deaths were understood differently. It seemed to me that we're presenting data and knowledge as if we've got a clearer understanding of it, but in every metric, we're on the decline. The situation's getting worse. The problems are being exacerbated. I don't know if you've what sort of opinion. I'm looking for maybe a wee bit. I know it'd be guesswork or opinions, but if you get any sort of kind of ideas on why that's the case.
I think you've actually captured it well yourself. You did, I think there has been changes. I think there's a couple of things that have occurred. If you go back earlier, I've done an analysis way back looking at regional variation and things like that. And I can see manipulation of data in different regions. And this is before we centralized. The problem is centralization means there's an easier control of the data to give a more uniform impression. And we've become the most centralized country in the Western world, I think. Everything's controlled from the top. There's one organization. We used to have multiple police organizations. Maybe I could bring back ancillary slides. I need to share again, don't I? Just bear with me a second. I've done some other work. previously when I was doing the petitions, etc. If I just bring this one up, I'll not bring it up fully live because I'll just keep it there.
Yeah.
This is what was happening with accidents and suicides, and this was early in the year. This is about the decade 2001, 2, 3, so on. And what we see in one of them is as accidents go up, so does suicides. As suicides go down and accidents, they go down and up together. This is happening in a number of regions. There are regions it didn't happen in. And this suggests that there's a manipulation. Let's not have too many accidents on their records. Let's not have too many suicides. So they're splitting the difference across them all. And that suggests that there's a manipulation of that data to make everybody feel content that there is nothing major going on. And then when you take that same principle, that period, you can see that volatility is roughly when Norman McFadden became the Crown Agent. So the Crown Agent is in charge of the Fiscal's Office. So these are the people who do this. Look at the volatility he's got while for suicide under him. Then we change to Catherine Dyer and how smooth it all becomes.
Yeah.
And Emily before that. So it's another one. And then a different, it's changing all the time based upon who the Crown Agent is. Now that shouldn't be the case if we're truly analysing death. This
Look
is
between 1984 and 1991.
Sorry, I missed that.
I'm saying look between 1984 and 1991 when Ian Dean was appointed, and then I know.
And then you look at this period too, Andrew Norman's appointed and how smooth it all is. And then we see Catherine Dyer was appointed, how smooth it all is. And these seem quite artificial as well because they're holding the central line very, very tightly when you would normally expect to see, for want of a better word, a bit bouncing, up, down, you know.
Yeah.
And there are control limits you can analyse and look at how many occur within certain limits and make assessments. So I don't really want, I mean, we can't fix what went on in the past. They've done it, it's happened. Well, what we'll have to do is if we can build a new consensus, if you like, for a social structure, which is, like I said, the majority of these deaths we're talking about are in the social sector, not in the criminal sector. Now, what should have happened in our cases, they said that there were non-criminal cases. They should have went back to the social sector, right? So we would have still had this coroner's inquest. So it would have satisfied us, even though we're saying it's criminality, because we'd have had a public forum to review our stuff and have it tested, not having to fight tooth and nail through Crown Courts, you know, media and everything to get listened to. You actually have an actual vehicle. So that's stop sharing again. So anyway,
So
yeah, I think dates play a big part.
So Stuart, I mean, these are quite damning. This is quite a damning analysis, to be fair.
Yeah.
And what we're suggesting is that there's absolutely a manipulation going on.
Yeah, I agree, but you know, typically we don't say that, do we? Absolutely.
Well,
I
listen,
agree. I'm agreeing with you. You know,
well,
there's
well,
a level of investigation you'd have to go for absolute proof, right? But at the end of the day, it looks like it's been manipulated to control. We look like we're trying to control suicide has not been too great. So we're taking off suicide drugs and it's going on to accidents. Like I said, nobody gets hit up about too many accidents. And socially, unfortunately, the drug community doesn't get good press in terms of the individuals and things like that. So you put them into camps that don't grab that emotionally. So they're out of homicide and they're out of suicide.
So it appears to me like, you know, the fact that Scotland's got the highest drug deaths in Europe and it's, you know, it's banded around, the politicians in particular play a very, you know, a disgusting game of political football with it, not
Once
just
a year.
politicians in Scotland, but also, you know, the politicians across the UK. You know, this is absolutely a political issue. So, you know, it seems to me that you know, when people who are drug addicted die or alcoholics die, that there's less sympathy, less investigation, less nuance involved, because of course, you know, people believe that that condition is completely self-inflicted, and you know that we don't have a compassionate response to that at all. I've witnessed it quite viciously the last couple of weeks. I've got a family member who's really suffering, and trying to get her access to care has been an absolute endurance test, you know. So I think what I'm trying to say is that, you know, because the families who are bereaved in particular, that 98% that you're talking about, they will be in their own process of grief. So in order for them to really politicise this and to organise themselves and mobilise themselves, it's quite a feat because of the trauma and the grief involved. But it seems to me that if they did, and if they really pushed forward with this, that it would become quite a big political issue, or it could become a big political issue,
I think it
particularly
should
in the
be.
run-up to the election. Yeah.
I mean, I think it should be, because at the end of the day, this is every family. There is not one family typically escape, because this is into accidents, suicides, it's everywhere. So at some point, we'll all get touched by this. And I think I'd said to you earlier, I mean, we set up a political party just to raise some concern about this. And I got to meet lots of people. And I would say 50% of the people had questions, unanswered questions on the death of loved ones. And part of this is just about even giving that answer, you know, because it is about the family as much as it is about getting the truth and things like that. And they'll become the one thing, because if you get the honesty of what happened and you can try and address what actually happened, then the life is not necessarily in vain, you know.
Yeah.
We can make changes through a single life that had been lost. And we
You
need to get
also,
to the point it's compassionate. It's not about beating up the Crown Office
Yeah.
or whatever, you know.
well, of course, well, we definitely tried that approach in the beginning as well, when we were raising any, you know, criticisms of the systemic failure
Yeah.
of the drugs deaths, and, you know, the people being offered drug treatment. So we were always very keen to focus on the systemic failure.
Yeah.
But then, you know, there's a certain lack of accountability within that as well. When you do that, when you just blame the system, and we are aware that there's tremendous you know, funding going on. Like, there isn't enough money. You know, there's, you know, people would argue the money's going into the wrong places, etc. But there has to be at some point somebody somewhere accountable. There has to be, you know, if we look for leadership, you know, surely leadership is about accountability and responsibility. And, like, you know, it's the same issue as far as I'm concerned. Like, we continue to see this area of the sudden deaths and the drug deaths, and, you know, many other areas that are being highlighted to me. The same problem is that there is no accountability, there's no responsibility, there's no monitoring, there's no evaluation. The data, like David said, can't be trusted. So, you know, eventually what you get is a crisis of legitimation, you know. So, like, the Scottish people lose faith, and that's very dangerous. You know, that we end up talking about, you know, civil unrest, and, you know,
If
to
you take things to an extreme,
well,
But-
I think so, but I think there is an element that could be said that that's extreme, Stuart, but I think that's where we're at. If we don't have institutions that we can rely on and that we can trust, you know, it
no, I agree with
becomes very
100%, 100% agree with that. I think the point we need to get to is the Crown Office in our country controls so much of our debates, laws, everything. And they sit over us like this body of people who have control of everything. And
So,
we have no way of challenging that.
well,
Unless you're
are they
prepared to
not,
spend hundreds
are
of
they not,
thousands. Sorry.
is the Crown Office not duty bound then to investigate when there's public concern?
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, is if we can create the public. The trouble is, back to somebody, would you trust them? I wouldn't trust the Crown Office to do anything. I mean, one of the saddest facts when I think about it, when other families come to us because of what we've been through, and they see our stuff in the paper, we've got videos, the Collins case, and they come and ask for advice. And the first thing we say to them, you cannot trust what the police and the Crown are telling you. You've got to have your questions, you've got to know where to ask the questions, and you've got to seek professional opinion. And that shouldn't be the case. It should be the case that we trust. Because there'll be good cops out there. I mean, I honestly, but they get dragged down by the bad system as well.
The police are completely overwhelmed, you know,
Yeah.
and that's probably partly why this has been, you know, the data's been manipulated. That when the police show up at a scene, they don't have the resources, they don't have the manpower, they don't, because they've been constantly defunded in Scotland, haven't they, for a long time?
There's an interesting thing the way we behave. Back at our work, when times were tight, the one thing everything get cut was expenses. You don't go and travel, you don't have maybe your canteen prices have to go up, and everywhere where you get the benefits. And this is true Westminster as well. We keep talking about this financial crisis, and nobody cuts back on the expenses. Nobody. They don't control it. They don't reduce it. They still have heavily subsidized food and everything in these places. And if you really say that there's a crisis of finance, that's how you behave.
Yeah.
You look at where you save money
Well,
and you
it's
invest it where it matters.
It's basic housekeeping, isn't it? When things
It
are
is the
tight
most
at
basic,
home,
yeah.
we cut back on the luxuries. But listen, so it seems to me that the very obvious solution to this is to have some sort of independent body that's unconnected to the Crown Office or the police, like a coroner's officer, and that would give the much needed scrutiny. And
So what's interesting that down south, the police report into the Crown Office, into the coroner, not to the prosecution service.
Okay.
They work with the prosecution service when they have a prosecution, but their first duty is to the coroner.
So explain why that's different in Scotland then.
And
Why?
Stuart,
Yeah.
and has it always been different?
Yeah, I mean, we are the only part of the English-speaking world that doesn't have coroners. So we've stuck with, I think, the FEI mentality in the Crown Office since separation, since we joined the union 300 years ago. And we are a wee bit, we get hung up on how we've done things and want to preserve them, rather than looking at, does it really serve us today? Is this really the vehicle today? So it's always been that.
So there was a detective sergeant, retired chap, phoned me after our appearance on Radio Scotland this morning, and he said to me it's basically draconian.
Yeah. You've got to be inside it, like we have, to really feel it. I mean, to literally go to meetings, and you have minutes in meetings that don't reflect the meeting. Everything that's controversial is omitted. And the thing is, we can prove this because we recorded meetings.
Yeah.
It's not like oh, you got it wrong or whatever. We've actually got it recorded in many meetings. And
yeah, well, this is also part of the problem, isn't it? Then you are seen as some sort of outlier troublemaker, you know. And
well, when Strathclyde came to investigate Colin's case, so we had oh, God knows how many times we had been at the Crown Office, how many times we'd met with fiscals, how many police officers we'd met. Strathclyde guy comes in, and the first thing he says to us, I don't care if you complain about me. I've had loads of complaints in my life. So that means there's a pejorative things being set up by someone else telling him that we are complainers. Yeah. And it was bullshit,
Yeah, we've encountered that, probably every person I meet in Scotland, I have to sort of caveat every conversation with, please keep an open mind, because our reputation has been somewhat misaligned with what we're trying to do.
But I do think, you come back to finance. I honestly see at a government level and a high level, finance is used as an excuse for everything, right? Because at the end of the day, let's say you can get, I don't know how much money you need to run your charity, but let's say you get given £1 million, then all you can do is do what you do with £1 million. Then you come back and say, well, for me to help X amount of more people, I need this kind of cash. Doesn't mean you can get it, but at least the dialogue is, I think in some parts of Scotland, and some things in Scotland, we're doing nothing because there's not enough money and there's a structural issue. They don't investigate what the structure is. They don't look at how you do it more efficiently and effectively. That's all my background has always been about efficiencies and effectiveness in business and big engineering type organizations. And it's amazing how you can improve things. And the cheapest way to do something is to do it right. It's the cheapest way to do anything, do it right.
Yeah.
And well-educated people.
And I think, we can finish on this. I think, like, the first rule of anybody doing anything well is to admit that they're not doing it well.
Yes.
In particular, we know that so well as people in recovery. We have to admit there's a problem before we can actually take stock, take inventory of where the issues are, and then
that's how we fix things.
Yeah. So
And
and until we get to that point, and you know, Favour UK have been very, you know, we're honoured to have tried to help this morning. We've done it very, very badly. We might have to do it again. We'll try and upload the presentation and
well, the thing is, I could possibly do my own Zoom on the presentation and send it to you, and then you
let's
could
do that. Let's do
But
that
then-
and we'll upload it.
It's a good thing the narrative's all there. It's not as if
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
might be redone.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's a term in psychology, it's schizophrenic business or organization. It's when the upper level stop taking external cues. They think they see what's going on rather than knowing what's going on.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of that goes on with these. They sit there, they sit in their offices, they don't engage even with their own structures and organizations. They take high level information from their people and they don't delve in, they don't review, and they don't check.
Well,
And-
there's a real culture in Scotland of the managerial class sort of protecting those at the top as well, but also it occurs to me across, particularly, you know, the third sector and the public sector, that you will be promoted if you're willing to spin and,
Aye.
you know, to sort of gloss over the bigger issues or the fundamental structural problems. If you can, you know, toe the party line, there will be reward in that. And that's about the managerial class, you know, not being too focused on integrity.
I was lucky. I worked for an American company with Hewlett Packard, and it became Agilent, and their fundamental values were very good. So I started at 16. I was allowed to go to a fairly senior level without going to uni, without doing anything. I was educated. But the question that was brought into me is you've got to challenge and question. I saw some of that behavior because some more parts of the organization behave like that. As a rule, though, I was allowed to speak freely and openly.
Yeah.
Bill Hewlett, and so one of these guys used to be the assistant defense secretary for the United States. And you'd sit at a table for lunch and it'd just be Dave and Stuart and Bill. There was none of this hierarchical formality.
Yeah.
I got that for the age of 16. And
Yeah.
therefore, I find it difficult to not challenge things, keep my
Yeah.
mouth shut, basically, you know. But I try and do it in a structural way as well, because just throwing out opinions is quite difficult because it doesn't get you anywhere.
Yeah, and I agree, like, you know, like presenting what you've presented this morning, that type of thoroughness it's hard to ignore that. You know, one of the sort of problems that I think we have, or certainly I have, is that I can become highly emotional, you know, about the situation. And I think that has pros and cons, mainly cons, you know, when I get really, really upset. But I think the way that you've delivered it this morning certainly adds a tremendous amount of weight. And for anybody who wants to investigate further, there's a whole realm of great data and great analysis to dig into.
I think the issue in there is almost every one of these you could dig in and create a whole slide set on just one area. The other thing that's difficult in our system is I'm having to go into our system and pull data from it's the same cause of death, but it's in different files, and you've got to pull that data across and mix it. So it's back to our system isn't easy to work with, and therefore it's easy to hide things.
Yeah, and that's probably, you know, the cynic and me says that's probably deliberate as well. Like if you
No, I don't think so. I just think it's although there's elements I've seen down south. I mean, we effectively should be coming off the same system, but they seem to have a level of detail. It's like I was looking at the aged people for falling, and I was trying to see could I recognize what age group was the most falls, and I couldn't get it. I could look at we've grown 30% in falls, but we've only grown 16% in our older population, so it doesn't really explain it. It feels uncomfortable. You kind of go a level below that. So the detail isn't there.
Well, the bottom line is if we don't have the detail, if we don't have the data, we can't possibly learn, you know, we can't possibly save lives if we don't know, if we're not scrutinising this data honestly and with integrity.
It has to be honest. It has to be the most basic part of the whole thing. That's why I was saying that is the fundamental building block of everything we do.
And surely that's what good leadership's about. Surely good leadership's about saying, you know, when we don't know, we say we don't know, and also when we do know, we hold our hands up and we say we've made mistakes, you know, and
I think the Crown Office don't know how to do that.
yeah.
That's the problem. They own all of this.
A lot of people in Scotland don't know how to do that.
No,
And
no.
I think it comes with a certain level of maturity, emotional maturity, to be able to do that. Do you know what I mean? And maybe just as a people, we're not very good at, you know, saying, you know,
I used to have a team working for me when I went to the States, and I made one rule to them. I said, you can make mistakes, let me know and we can try and work our way through it. You lie to me, we're done. That was it. I couldn't have, because I need to know when we've made a mistake as quickly as possible, because that's the easiest thing to rectify right at that beginning.
Yeah.
I mean, if you take it back to a simple thing in money, between Collins cases and all our cases, if you looked at them, I bet you it's cost millions for the
Yeah.
amount of work they've done to try and cover up, and we still not went away.
Yeah, well, listen, we'll just leave it there,
Yep.
you know, on that note.
Well,
'Cause
thank you. I need to say thank you because we
No,
needed
it's
a platform to begin this. So thank you.
I don't know if we got one, but we'll certainly try and make
Oh
sure.
God, I'm going to be in TV a lot, so there's some kind of platform. It's how we push on, and can you extend this to other people? Can we get into the mental charities and things like that? Because this is for everybody. This isn't a single topic.
Well, that again, that's about good leadership, isn't it? That's about people coming forward and saying, we believe what you're saying. We
Yeah.
have this issue in our sector as well. Can we work together to sort
Yeah.
it out? You know,
Just demand change first.
yeah,
Accept there's a need and then demand the change.
yeah.
We can always get to know what to do. It's just you need to accept there's a problem.
Yeah, I'm good at the demanding part. I'm
Anyway,
typical Scottish women. I want it done yesterday.
well, thanks everybody. I appreciate the time taken, and like I said, I'll do a recording again and get it to you. Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you, Stuart.
Right.
God bless.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Stuart.
Right. Take care, guys.
Bye.